AOL dial-up, corporate espionage, catfishing, shitty power dynamics, and a bouquet of sharpened pencils. That's right. This week we're talking about 1998 rom-com, You've Got Mail. And welcome to the Rom-Com Rescue Podcast, a brand new podcast where we bring the love and life lessons from your favorite rom-coms. I'm Kira Saban. I am a healthy dating educator, a certified coach, and a positive psychology practitioner. But more importantly, I spend my days teaching the skills and mindsets of dating.
And I'm Isabelle. I am a licensed clinical psychologist and an EFT certified couples therapist, and I help couples have the happiest, healthiest relationship possible.
Join us weekly as we break down the best love lessons from your favorite rom-coms so we can all get into the best relationships possible. Because we believe that we create our own happily ever afters.
In case you missed this film, which is unlikely, but just in case, struggling boutique bookseller Kathleen Kelly, Meg Ryan, hates Joe Fox, Tom Hanks, the owner of a corporate Fox Books chain store that just moved in across the street. When they meet online, however, they begin an intense and anonymous internet romance, oblivious of each other's true identity. Eventually, Joe learns that the enchanting woman he's involved with is actually his business rival. He must now struggle to reconcile his real-life dislike for her with the cyber love he's come to feel. That is a very forgiving description, I think.
Who writes these? Legit, like I go to Google and I will copy and paste the Google plot basics. But that was their takeaway, is that Joe learns the enchanting women he's involved with is his business rival, and he must now struggle to reconcile. That was the takeaway from that movie. Oh my goodness. Well, I think everybody knows that where we're going today, because Isabelle, let's get into it. When was the first time you saw this, or how long has it been?
It's been a long time. I couldn't tell you the last time I saw it, but when I was watching this, however many years ago, I've seen it probably 10,000 times, and I thought it was the most lovely, romantic, sweet, exciting film ever. How long has it been since you've seen it, Kira?
So, first of all, this is like the only time I virtually can say this, or very few times, that I saw this on a first date. So I had met a guy out here in Madison in 1998. You were what? An embryo? I don't know. But a mere child. 10. Okay. But we actually had met. This was the date that he asked me on, which I now, as a dating expert, tell people to never go to a movie on a first date. That is the most terrible idea for a date because you don't talk the whole time. But so I remember seeing it in the theater. I remember loving it because I'm a big Nora Ephron fan. She did When Harry Met Sally, which is my very favorite rom-com of all time. She also did Sleepless in Seattle. So she did a lot of rom-coms in the 90s that are pretty iconic, shall we say. There's that New York like vibe that it's just warming and cozy and lovely. But I have not seen this in years. But I remember having nice thoughts about it just because I like Tom Hanks. I like Meg Ryan. I like Nora Ephron. But dude, this did not hold up for me. Not even a little.
This was the safest choice in our first 5. I thought this was going to be the one that we said was the healthiest relationship that we could hold up under scrutiny. And watching it again, it does not do that.
Does not hold up. I will tell you, I am actually angry. It's funny the notes I wrote down, but I was like, what did we do to make 90s rom-com Meg Ryan go away? Because she was amazing, right?
Oh.
She is so incredible. Her hair, her clothes. I don't think that a human can be more adorable than Meg Ryan in this film. When she's like, go to the mattress, right? And punching things. And it's business. It's not personal. It's business. I'm saying that over and over again. Oh my gosh. She, to me, was such a fantastic character. I really thought they wrote her. She was lovely, right? She was thoughtful. Yes. She was kind. She was a pillar of her small business community. She was part of her neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we've got Joe.
And she was lovely, and I agree with all of that. And she was also realistic. She would get annoyed at people over things. Like she just came off as like very genuine and like she could be a very real person. And then Joe walks in as the quintessential bad business guy who doesn't care about who he steps on, who just wants to make money, who's got this big superstore, who, if we give him a little bit of understanding, clearly comes from a family of broken relationships, and he has not had a good model for what healthy love looks like, which we can really see when his future stepmother is hitting on him over and over.
Right. Jillian, yes.
But Jillian, great character. Um, but despite that, he's mean. He's just mean in an interpersonal settings that's hard to overlook, especially given the contrast of how sweet and authentic she is. It really highlights how cruel he can be.
I think last week discussing How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, we're both like they're both pretty complicit in this situation. There's some similarities. Rom-coms love to withhold information. That's
Mhm.
part of the obstacle. That's part of the will they, won't they. So they love to withhold information. And we saw that last week. We're both like, they're both kind of the problem here. But this to me was very one sided. I read a couple articles and things like that. I try to do my due diligence. And somebody said that he was like casually cruel. And I think that was
Mm.
a
Perfect.
perfect of what he was. He was a little demeaning or degrading to people. He was
Yes.
yeah, and he was just casually cruel, like, not noticing how his actions or withholding information could possibly affect or hurt other people. I actually wrote the script was more delightful than I remembered, right? Because I think just Nora Ephron
Mm.
writes really well and delightfully. I just don't know how to describe it any more than it's just delightful. But his character and a little forward early trivia, Tom Hanks was on her and how much he hated this character, disliked how
Wow.
mean this character was. Yeah, which made me feel a little bit better because I was like, as a pretty super Tom Hanks fan, this is hard to watch him in. This is hard to
He
watch.
absolutely yes. And I wonder if that early trivia makes me think he worked really hard to make his character seem less awful because he does not come off as super unlikable. I don't despise him when I'm watching the movie.
100%.
I overlook the casual cruelty of how he mocks the customers for his future superstore, right? And how he just levels these insults at people, but he does it in the lighthearted, charming way that makes you not deeply hate him. When you take a look back and what he says and his behavior, you're like, what's happening here? You're like acting like a really bad person. But it's interesting because I don't hate him when I'm watching it. I don't feel that. I don't know if you felt like you disliked him, but
I wrote down that at the time, I can't think of one other actor who could have played this role and not be hated.
ooh,
I think now maybe I'm thinking maybe a Paul Rudd or a Mark Ruffalo because those are two of my favorite guys. Are just super
all
likable,
right.
but I don't think any other if I put in like a Matthew McConaughey or I'm trying to think like a Richard Gere, who else was in 90s rom-coms, like does not work, right? The only way that
Yeah.
this even slightly works is because Tom Hanks is so freaking likable. And
Yeah.
even though he's terrible, like at the end, I was like taking notes. I'm like, I'm smiling at the end of this. I can't believe I'm smiling. It's terrible, but I'm still smiling. I'm still slightly won over by this New York over the rainbow freaking moment. Like I'm still won over by this movie, which says to me it's a semi good rom com. If I'm still smiling at the end,
Hmm.
even after he was like
Lying to her
gaslighting her, manipulating her. He would basically be talking about himself, right? He goes,
himself.
well, do you know that he's
Yes.
married? And then she goes back and asks, and then why? And then he's saying, I can't meet up with you right now because I'm tweaking something. And tweaking is, I'm manipulating you in real life and you just don't know it. You just don't
Yeah.
know it.
That I mean, him being harsh in their business relationship, I understand. That's who he is. That's how he operates. Fine. It was when he realized who she was and then
Oh,
he
no.
still was intentionally deceiving her and putting thoughts into her head and trying to, I don't know, change. her perspective of him without her realizing it. None of that felt good. The reason why I was also smiling at the end, and I think this line changes everything. And if without this line, I think this would feel a lot less good when we
I
see them in the park. You know what I'm about to say. When she says, I was hoping it would be you. And that makes us think she maybe knew, maybe not all along, but for some part of it. And she was playing along to some degree, hoping that it would be him. And that is the only redeeming part of it that makes
only.
it feel okay. Because the reasonable response would have been, are you fucking kidding me? You have known this whole time and you have been gaslighting me about my experience with this person and playing me. And this is how you choose to tell me. Walk out of that park, take his dog. He doesn't deserve Brinkley.
Right?
That's the end.
Done. Poor Brinkley.
I
This
know.
is truly an animal rights podcast for movies. So it's just, you're absolutely right. As soon as you said there was one line, I'm like, you're right, because this movie does not work without that one line. Like, that one line
Yeah.
basically says she's okay. Like, she cries a little, she's confused a little bit, she's got that Meg Ryan angry look a little bit, and then just comes to an okay or just acceptance of this, and was like, I was
Yeah.
hoping it was you. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. I know we have a couple of categories of things we want to talk about because there's a lot of stuff to talk about. But one of the things that I know that you talked about, that just the timing of this with the beginning of email and AIM and AOL. And in fact, I saw a bunch of stuff online about people thinking that this was the most blatant product placement of all time with the AOL, because it was actually not called You've Got Mail, and AOL paid to be part of it, and it got called You've Got Mail because AOL would say You've Got Mail. So it's actually,
Oh,
the name was
wow.
changed for like AOL, which
Because,
is crazy to me,
wow.
right? So I thought that was really interesting, but it's also just interesting to go back to that little moment in time where the world isn't run by computers yet. Nobody has a cell
Hmm.
phone or a smartphone. We're just starting to see like the big box stores come in, right? So that Fox
Hmm.
Books is obviously very similar to Barnes and Noble,
Barnes and Noble.
which is hilarious.
Hmm.
That doesn't hold up because now Barnes and Noble is struggling. That, like, soon after
Yeah.
the Fox Books, how far would have they have gone with Amazon? That they were
Hmm.
the big bad guys, and that probably within 5 to 10 years they would have been mostly squashed because of Amazon. So it's just such an interesting time in our society and country, and just, it's so interesting this rom-com was set during that time because it just feels forever ago now.
Yeah, it really does. Seeing her partner come in with a typewriter and
Oh, I
him
love it.
resisting
Oh
the
my god.
internet because he wants to stick to the typewriter, that really dates this movie as to when it's happening. And it is interesting seeing how people didn't have any rules for the internet and their relationships. And now we have so many rules because we've lived through it for years and years, and social media and email, and what all of this stuff means, what the boundaries are for our relationships. It's almost reminds me of what we're going through now with AI, with ChatGPT. Of, is it okay to use this for papers? Is it okay to use in school? Is it okay to use at work, or is it not okay? And there are no policies, and nobody knows yet how they feel about it. Watching this made me think this is the time of the internet having no rules, the Wild West, even as specifically as her asking, "Is it cheating? Is it cheating if I'm talking to this person online?" And nowadays, we wouldn't even have to ask that
Right.
question, right?
Right.
Yeah. Of course, it's emotional infidelity if you are sharing all of your thoughts and feelings and dreams with some other person besides your partner and keeping this online person a secret from your partner. Of course it's being unfaithful, but at that time, they really didn't know, and I think that's why watching it when I was younger, I was charmed by it because I we didn't know back then how this would feel for relationships.
Agreed. And you're right. This is our first time that we're seeing this emotional infidelity, and we're gonna actually talk about that in the deep dive today. And it's the first time that we're seeing like an online relationship, because this would have, a mere 5 years earlier, been pen pals, would have been letters. It's crazy. And can we just say that Greg Kinnear is the cutest Luddite I've ever seen in my life? I could not love Greg Kinnear more. I could not love Parker Posey more, who plays his girlfriend.
Yes.
Those
Oh
are
my
two
God.
of my favorite. So I loved both of their characters in here. They're fantastic. But yeah, there's just things in place and conversations that we know nowadays. That was just such a new time. 1998, I think that I got my first email in 96 or 97. Like it wasn't, this was totally new. And in fact, little fun fact I'm going to bring in early is that Kevin Feige, I think is how you say his name. So the guy who's in charge of the whole Marvel universe was a production
Uh-huh.
assistant on this. And it was his job to teach Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan how to use their computer, how to do AOL, how to send an email. He was actually the person in charge of teaching it to them and practicing so they would
Oh,
know how to do it. Isn't that crazy?
wow.
It's just crazy. And then he would go on to creating the Marvel
Wow.
Universe, but that was like one of his early gigs. And that was his job, was to help
Wow.
them learn how to use a computer and send an email so that they would look convincing on screen.
You're right. He has always been ahead of his time,
Ahead of
and
his
we're
time.
just seeing evidence of that. Okay. It was nostalgic, especially when he messages her and she's online, because that was a new thing to be online at the same time and talking in tandem. It brought me back to my
Oh,
AIM
yeah.
days, because that was how you flirted with people, is you would be online at the same time and send messages, or you'd have a way message up that was like flirtatious and you wanted them to see it. It was such a different world back then. It was fun. It was really fun.
It does feel more innocent, doesn't it? It certainly does. And I know that we
Yeah.
always feel that way about the past, which may be true or not. But I remember being excited seeing an email or a message coming in a way that now that it's 2024 and I am basically sending emails and messages all day, every day, and they are not special anymore to me whatsoever in this business. It was just, it took me back to a time where you would see a message come up or an email come up from somebody that you were hoping to hear from. And it was just like, oh, just that excitement and the butterflies in your
Mhm.
stomach. And it was just, it was something, it was a new time and it was a different time. And it was an interesting, it's so interesting now because like I was thinking like there wasn't even scammers back then. There wasn't people trying to take people for thousands of dollars and just, but it was a different time. We have to be so much more thoughtful and careful in a way that they did not have to in 1998 because yeah,
Mm.
we now talk so differently about meeting people online and not anonymity. I've done full podcasts on why I don't like online dating for the pure fact of how much lying there is, how much people withhold information, how much scamming there is. And this wasn't, of course, a conversation at this point at all. She just trusted that he was
Mhm.
a nice
Mhm.
guy, over 30 in New York.
30 chat room.
Right, exactly. And that of course he was going to be a good person. Did not love the whole we don't have to dive into anything about Dave Chappelle, but his character was not there
Not
was
great.
not
No.
great. It was not great. He was like just this guy who Tom Hanks would talk
No
to
substance.
and would make fun of other people.
Agreed. It's one of the moments where they're trying to make him likable, is when he's being a little more vulnerable with his friends, right? That's when he opens up a little bit more and is supposed to connect with him in those moments. And he doesn't seem any better in those moments when he's with Dave Chappelle. Yeah, I totally agree.
What were some of your favorite like love lessons? What do you think did work? What do you think that we learned from this that did work?
I found a lot of moments that I thought were beautiful. My biggest lesson is going to be, I think, the importance of paying attention to your partner. And we see people in their current relationships just not listening to each other, or I should say, their partner's not listening to them. Frank just responds quickly to whatever Kathleen says to make her feel better. He goes up onto his own little intellectual rant because he's very self focused. And same for Patricia, very focused on her career and whatever she's thinking is the most important thing. And they just don't pay attention to Joe and Kathleen. And so, of course, there's not much there. And when you see people pay attention to their partner and tune in, which they do online, you can see how important that is for attachment. And I will say, for Frank's character, I gave him a lot of credit because although he didn't always do it in the most effective way, he showed up. He defended her. He was on her team. He invested time in his relationship with her. And when he broke up with her, it was a lovely example of what a breakup could look like. It was honest, it
I
was
loved it.
connected.
Loved
That
it.
was beautiful. What were your takeaways? What were your favorite love lessons that you saw?
Well, I wrote down for that breakup, I'm like, it's a little unrealistic. I want it to be super realistic. It's a little unrealistic because it seems that they've been together for quite a while, right? Like they're living together. This is not a newer relationship. So for them to just both look at each other and be like, I don't love you. And the other person's, I don't love you either. It felt a little unrealistic, but I loved it. I loved how they support each other. And my biggest dream in what I do is that we would break up or divorce in a kinder
Better.
way. That's
Mhm.
one of, I'm sure, same with you, right? Like that there is so much shame and so much sometimes trauma that happens through breakups or divorce that can bring people down for years
Mhm.
that I think doesn't necessarily have to happen. My goal is always, even when I talk about Danny, that if for some reason we break up in the future, that ideally, we both can look at each other and say, thank you. Thank you for spending this portion of your life with me. Thank you for trying and believing me and loving me and everything else. So that even if it doesn't work out, that I want to acknowledge that because we both showed up. We both chose each other. We both really tried. And I think the biggest thing I saw between both of the relationships, their kind of early relationship, the Parker Posey and then with Greg Kinnear, is that we see relationships without connection. And that's why I think we're rooting for Tom Hanks and for Meg Ryan to get together. Sorry, Joe and Kathleen, is because we start to see a connection. We start to see a vulnerability. And we like both of the characters. There's not enough Parker Posey in this world for me. Like, it doesn't exist. She was a 90s independent movie queen. I just love her so much. But still, there was like this point where she like comes in almost is like, glomming onto Tom to try to get him to do something and humping him a little bit. And I was like, oh, I'm totally that person in my relationship. I'm like, I am Parker Posey in this moment. I am that person. Where Danny says, okay. Oh, so I really, I think what we're seeing are what we see a lot, which is relationships that look good on paper or seem to make sense, but the people aren't really connected. They're living separate lives or parallel lives. They're checking in with each other, but they're not really listening. Exactly what you're saying. And we see that with that relationship and that where the emails or whether it be letters for like an older movie or whatever it is, there's a vulnerability that comes with anonymity. And one of my favorite things is that we were able to see them interact in real time and then come back before they found out who each other was and be able to acknowledge, I just had this moment. I'm not proud of it. I'm not happy about it. So we're getting to see a vulnerability because of that anonymity, because of those emails, because they don't know each other yet. That I thought was really lovely that we don't get to see. We got to see them bring down walls that they're not going to do in real life. And that we don't get to see that often in movies because everybody's so guarded, everybody's so worried that the other person's going to hurt them. I liked that what made Tom Hanks redeeming to me is that in those emails after being a jerk, he would come and acknowledge, I was just a jerk and I'm sad about it. I'm not proud of it. And just that I wish you could take my zingers, but you probably won't like yourself after you do. And they have that conversation and just I loved that part. And that couldn't have happened unless they were anonymous at that time. If they would have known each other at that time. So that part of the movie to me was so beautiful because most of the time when we see people dating or falling in love on rom-coms, they're very guarded. They're very scared. They're very nervous on what's going to happen. And even if it's over the top grand gestures, we see a lot of insecurities. And this allowed us to see the real parts of them. And I loved that. I love that because we don't get to see that, I think, that much in rom-coms. Or not, especially not rom-coms of that time.
Yes. Yeah, and to this day, people are guarded in the end because partly they have to have this romantic tension, the will they or won't they, so they keep coming together, opening up, connecting without any kind of barrier or conflict
Right.
or something. But I think the other way of looking at this too is there's the anonymity piece. They were able to be open and vulnerable because they didn't know who they were talking to. And also in real life, that can be easier to do when you are first dating someone and you don't have as much to lose and you're not afraid of them seeing you in a negative light. And so part of this could be just that it's an early relationship too. Whereas these longer term partners they have, they've just stopped investing that emotional time into each other. They've stopped opening up, they've stopped sharing, they've stopped listening, right? You take that person for granted. You live this parallel life where you're busy with the logistics of what you're going to do that evening and who's taking the dog out. Whereas in early relationships, we focus much more on sharing who we are and getting to know the other person.
Right.
And that's a practice that you carry with you in your relationship. It's not something that automatically happens. And I feel like it's those two things. It's the anonymity and it's that it's early on and they're making that a priority, whereas they didn't do that in their other relationships. Or when they tried to, their partner didn't listen and clearly just skipped over it to the solution or to whatever they wanted to talk about, which obviously didn't work out for them.
Yeah,
But there were good
absolutely.
moments, good lessons.
What do we think some of the not great lessons were? Which I am looking and I have a list here for myself. One of the things that I have wrote down here, and this is the way that I wrote it. At best, Joe is an unhealed rich guy. At worst, he's a liar and manipulator who is casually cruel and ruins her and her livelihood without a fucking apology.
Yes, yes, preach. That is the problem. Even though he redeems himself through his deceit at the end, I don't see real remorse. I don't see any
None.
effort to make it right. And no, there is
Nope.
no apology. How does she forgive him without an apology? Kira, explain that to me.
Make it make sense, Tom. Make it make sense. It drove me crazy that in that last scene where she just keeps going, I need to go because she's going to meet up with New York
Mm,
152 or whatever. And he just keeps saying, I wish you could forgive me for this. I wish you. So all of this is on her, not
true.
I came in with my family's business, put you out, which we, by the way, laugh about in my grandfather or father's office. We'll ignore that
Even though
in
my
this moment.
grandfather loved your mom. Uh huh.
Yeah, absolutely. But still, oh, sorry about that, guys. Those people are enchanting. Oh, well, it's just so callous and so like, well, it's just business. It's not personal. And that theme comes up many times. And I love that at one point, like Meg Ryan's character or Nora Ephron, if we want to say it as she wrote this, is pushing back on what does that even mean? Because I hate
Hmm.
stuff like that because we're still humans. And it's very interesting to be a solopreneur, one person business because I'm still
Hmm.
human. And when people reject my services, it feels like they're rejecting me. But as soon as we take out the human element to anything we do, whether that be business, whether that be relationships, whether that be anything, we have a problem because this is still being run by humans. Everything we're doing is still human. And so I was so frustrated at the end that he still even brought this back of it's your job to forgive me versus I see what my family does. I see that we come in and we take over these neighborhoods and we take away people's jobs and livelihoods. And I'm sorry about that. And is there a way that I can help make that right? Like instead of just, I just wish you'd forgive me.
We're skipping over the fact, just as an asterisk here, I don't think they had to stomp out the tiny local neighborhood shops for their huge superstore to be successful, which is why this really isn't business. He even points out how little money she makes. It really was personal. It was to dominate. It was to monopolize, right? That's an ego issue. It's not a financial issue. And I agree with this putting it on her. If only you could get past this little thing, right? I view it differently now. I like you, and I wish I hadn't done that. Not that he says that even, but I think it shows how people struggle with authentic apologies and taking responsibility. And I think it's easy to skip to the part of, I wish you could get over this so that we could be in a good place because we both want that. And she miraculously does, which I have no idea how. An authentic apology goes a long way. A real, genuine apology where you take responsibility, you acknowledge how you've hurt them, you see their side and why they feel the way they do, and you genuinely say that you're sorry and then offer to make amends in the ways that you can. I feel like the art of that apology has been lost and has been lost for a long time if we don't see it in this movie from 1998. Your take on Joe, I have no issues with. It's exactly right.
It's just there's a lot of different ways they could have written him. There's a lot of different ways that they could have made him part of the Fox empire, but also human and also a
Yeah.
potential
Yeah.
partner because he was neither of those things in
Mhm.
this scenario. Because to me, a
Mhm.
potential partner is, oh gosh, I found out who you are. I'm going to let you know. And we're going to talk through this kind of awkward, slightly funny moment of being pen pals, sharing really deep, dark secrets and thoughts and dreams with each other. And we actually know each other in real life. Isn't this slightly
Mhm.
funny? But we never see any of that.
Mhm.
He basically takes that information, manipulates it for his own gain in many different ways. And then we're supposed to just believe that this is all going to work out and be okay.
He's insecure. A secure person would not treat other people like this, would not have to stomp out that tiny children's store around the corner, would not have to, and this part stuck out to me a lot because this is, he barely knows her at this point when they're at that party for a mutual friend and realize who they are in real life. They don't know the online component to it yet. And when they're standing with their partners talking to each other, the way that he silently mocks what Greg Kinnear says and is indicating how little respect he has for what he's saying really floored me because
Yeah,
that's just
I agree.
putting down a stranger just to put her down too. And no one with a healthy level of self esteem and self worth would feel the need to so pervasively insult and denigrate people. Joe's sounding worse and worse the more that we're talking about this, I
I
have to
know.
say.
It's true though, because they didn't give him a ton of redeemable qualities. The only redeemable qualities I feel like he has are just what I feel like Tom Hanks brought to that character because they did not write a really good person. They did not write a kind person. They did not. There is even a way for somebody to run a family business with integrity and with kindness and with like, we're moving into the neighborhood. Like, how can we help you transition? Or how can, you know what I mean? There's a lot of different ways that
Mhm.
it, he is just terrible. And we are supposed to justify the terrible.
Yeah.
And I can't.
And I put out an idea for you. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. It just occurred to me. Part of what makes him seem so nice and likable is that he's great with the kids. His weird brother aunt situation, he's adorable with them. He does whatever they want. He's there watching them sing, and he is nice with his dog. We see him taking care of and being loving with his dog. So anything younger, dependent on him, that in no way threatens his sense of self or his success, he is wonderful too. And by the time he's wonderful to her, it's after he has taken her business away from her. She has no family. She now spends no time with her friends because her business is gone. And now she is this adorable, dependent little creature who brings him such joy because she in no way threatens any part of him. What do you think?
Holy shit. You just opened up a Pandora's box of awesomeness for me. And it's getting into a topic that we wanted to talk about anyway, which is power dynamics. That
The ranch?
he seems to only want relationships with people that he can control, that he can manipulate, because that's what we have to truly look at here is the fact that I'm a big believer in building partnerships. I believe in coming in with both people having goods and not so goods and being human and offering things to the relationship, and not one person doing everything and not one person paying for everything. And like, that's what I teach. That's what I believe in. That's the way my own relationship runs. And I think it's very clear here that Joe doesn't want a relationship that he is not in power of, period. And
Yeah.
that my question, one of the things that I wrote down is, can you build love if one person has all the power? Can you create a loving relationship if one person has all the power?
That's such an interesting question. And the couples therapist in me immediately goes to there's many types of effective, successful relationships, right? That some people make relationships based on a transactional agreement where they're doing it for business reasons that make sense. There are arranged marriages, there are love matches, there are all sorts of ways to make a union, and that has changed over time in history. But this question of can you have a loving relationship with such a big power dynamic is a great question. And I think both people have to want that power dynamic.
And be okay with that power dynamic? Because basically we're supposed to believe that they quote unquote fell in love, although there was one person who had all the information and one person who had none of the information.
Yes.
So how does that work? Exactly. How does it work when one person holds the cards, one person is aware of a lot of things that the other person isn't, right? Like it's almost like a parent child, or I'm just going to say, like you said, like a dependent. Like we see Joe and he's great with kids. He's great with his dog. He's great with that kind of situation. But how is he going to be with somebody who is actually more of an equal? And honestly, the greatest thing about Kathleen Kelly in this movie is they write her as being just a really amazing, secure, confident, full woman.
Yes.
So is she really going to be okay when they sit down and talk about, and she says, how long have you known? Are they really going to be okay there? When he says, I've known since you were in that cafe waiting for me, I legit stood you up and then came back and manipulated you. Is she going to be like, oh my God, that's adorable. Let's make out. No, she's going to be like, that was a horrible night for me. And he had a moment to make that better or not.
Yeah. I think if it was us, we would say no. I don't know how she would get past that night. When he baited her into insulting him, and then when she finally has the zinger, he acts all wounded and like she was the one who did wrong in it. That was bordering on emotional abuse for me. Didn't love that. But they also portray her as this sort of idealistically naive person, right? Who doesn't really know how to run her business and who like has these lovely forgiving conversations and right, even with the breakup, even though it ended up being really easy and clean, everybody feels hurt if the person they're dating says, I don't love you, even if you didn't love them too. That stings, but she takes it like a champ and right, everything she does is kind and forgiving. So maybe she would just accept it, right? See his side, accept it, be generous. And this is the problem with a power dynamic is that it makes her easy to take advantage of.
And then that's where we come and we talk about this movie and going, so this is the character they wrote, this is what they created, but what's the healthy thing? And the healthy thing is that if she were my client, I'd be like, this is a hell no for me on every level. Like on every level. However, if we are going to make this work, here are the conversations that you guys are going to need to have and that you're going to have to be okay with when you find out the answers. This is the way that I exist, I teach, because the thing is that would Kathleen Kelly's character in this movie maybe go, oh, I'm glad it was you. I was hoping it was you. But where
Let's
do we
talk.
go? But let's sit down and talk because you clearly have a ton more information than I do right now. And I cannot, only because of the way the character is written, and I will even say, watching this again yesterday, like she felt almost spacey, like almost.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's supposed to be this really just sweet, naive, delightful side, but it comes off as a little bit like, huh? Oh, is
Yeah.
this happening to me? That I didn't love. That I didn't love. And in
Mhm.
fact, I have been all up in rom-com grills right now. And I watched a different movie last night and just seeing the difference in characters for women in 1998 versus
Mhm.
2018 was night and day, was absolutely night and
Mhm.
day and exciting to me personally.
Yeah.
Because yeah, Kathleen Kelly is sweet and great and wonderful, but she's a little spacey, she's a little naive. And I'll tell you, I have good friends who are New Yorkers. You are an East Coaster. She's like
No.
growing up in New York her whole entire life. So is she really going to be this whole idyllic? I just stop at the
Not
flower
at
stands
all.
every morning. And no, she's probably watching for shit. She's probably been buffed. I don't know. Who knows? The 70s and the 80s in New York were not good time. Meg Ryan, I wasn't sure if I was going to bring this up, but she almost turned this role down because she felt like she was getting really pigeonholed into the rom-com specifically. This is her third Nora Ephron rom-com. And she's like, I was pretty over it at this point. And this was not a stretch for me. Both her and Tom Hanks actually turned this role down in the beginning, turned these roles down. It
Oh.
somehow came back to it. I don't actually think that Meg Ryan thinks of this being a great role that she did, which was interesting to me because I think it is iconic in 90s, in New York, in Nora, and all of the things. So that was a little interesting to me.
It is, and it is all of those things. What we don't see happen is a lot of character development. We don't see big changes, big realizations, or if they reportedly have them, we don't see them enacted. And I think that makes it hard for their relationship as well, is that they start very far apart in real life and very close together on the internet. And when those worlds start to combine, we don't see them evolving in terms of their relationship. We see them connecting in real life, but because he's manipulating her into dating him without her realizing it and weaseling his way into her heart so that when he shows up in the park, she'll be open to it. But I think that is a missing piece here. You don't see them like genuinely growing together in this relationship as it unfolds. And that's because, like you said, he knows things that she doesn't. And so that literally can't happen. So that by the time they're together at the end, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel authentic. It doesn't feel like they've grown individually or together. It feels like she got convinced into wanting to be with him.
Yeah.
He's good at it though.
And I will say, so like last week we saw The Bet, which is her big romantic trope, right? And this week is what's called enemies to lovers. And I will tell you, I don't think I'm a fan of enemies to lovers. And I think it's probably going to come up on this podcast more than a few times because there's
Yes.
many enemies
Yes.
to lovers rom-coms that we watch and that we love. And there's something about it that feels so dirty to me. There's something about it that feels like this person was mean, was rude. She doesn't see this, but at one point he calls her a bitch, which I was like, don't
Oh,
love that. I just am not a fan because I think that when we see these people be mean to each other, say awful things to each other or about each other, to believe for me that all of that's gone and now that they're going to build something beautiful is a really hard. That's a dream. That's a goal. That's
hard
right.
sell.
That's a hard sell for
Mhm.
me, right? That's a hard sell that when this guy literally ruined her family and her friends' livelihood, that I think that everybody's going to be like, so we haven't talked about, I'm always thinking about what's next. So after that kiss happens in the park, after they have this romantic moment, after let's say that she doesn't ask any major questions right away, what happens when she goes back to all of her friends and family and former employees and says, you guys, I'm dating Joe Fox? What happens when she starts hobnobbing with his friends, his family members, his dad, his grandfather, who have 4-year-old children? That stuff
No,
matters. That stuff matters. And
it does
it
matter.
makes me want to talk about one thing that I think happens in dating a lot, which is we looking constantly for commonalities. I think that's the number one thing that people would probably say. I'm looking for somebody who has things in common with me. If you like to exercise, then you want somebody who also will want to exercise with you. If you love a genre on TV or movies, we love when we can find somebody who loves that too, and we can talk about it for hours, or books or things like that. But one of the things that they have found is that commonalities are nowhere near as important as values. And even though we can look at Kathleen and Joe, both of them obviously lovers of books, obviously lovers of just that
Mhm.
world, and they could probably talk forever about the book business and everything else. Are their values going to be the
Yep.
same? We see Joe, he is very capitalistic, he is very into money. His family seems to not have a lot of redeeming qualities when it comes to being worried about the little person or even kind about their own customers. Here we see Kathleen, who is an overgiving person, right? Who's into community, who's into belonging, who's
Hmm.
into service, into connection. Those are very different
Hmm.
sets of values. And the way that I describe values to my clients is that it's the way you see the world. It's the way you interact and move through this world.
Yeah.
And to me,
Yes.
I'm
Hmm.
concerned that this is going to really go anywhere because they look at the world two very different ways. And I think that even when she was
Yeah.
saying to Frank, we look so good on paper, he like writes for the local paper about social justice and she owns a little cute bookstore that people have loved for 50 years and they look good on paper. I do think that there was just a lack of connection there in some other things, but probably their values
Hmm.
were a lot more aligned than we're going to find out her and Joe's are. But I
Hmm.
think that's a really important conversation we don't have
Yeah.
enough, that when you don't look at the world the same way that your partner does, there's going to be power struggles. There are going to be those value differences will come up again and again. And I'm sure as a couples therapist,
All the time. Absolutely. In part because people don't ask the questions up front.
which is
Where
what
are
I'm
your values?
what
Where does it lie?
right, which is what I'm trying to teach people to
You
do.
yes, keep up the good work. More people need it. And I think there's assumptions we make that people will share our values because we think our values are right. That's just a human instinct of the way that you view the world and interact with the world feels right to you. It makes sense to you. You assume other people are going to feel that same way. And that is definitely not always the case. And it doesn't come out sometimes until later on in a relationship. When it turns out, actually, I thought we both really valued having a family, but that looks very different for how we actually want to treat it. And we aren't aligned in the way that we thought we would be. We
Yes.
really did value our careers, but 10 years from now, actually, that looks very different. And we're fighting all the time because of the time we're spending on our individual careers, right? And people don't either know to ask those questions or know what questions to ask or how to ask them. And some people don't know the answers. And that's individual work to do to figure out your values and what matters to you, what will matter to you and a partner. But yes, commonalities are easy to spot, easy to connect over. They feel wonderful. Values matter way more. And I think the values piece for this couple could it be better highlighted with the question of if Kathleen had found out first who NY152 was, right? If she had looked into the coffee shop and he was sitting there, would she do to him what he did to her? And we can safely say no.
No.
She would never have done that to him. That is an important value difference on how you treat people when you have power, information, whatever it is. She would never have treated him that way.
And I'm sitting here thinking, how would that have gone down? She probably would have been like, oh, okay, this is weird and awkward, but they probably would have sat down and had an interesting conversation about it. And I feel like on some level, they probably would have decided to part ways. I think that would have actually probably been, okay, this is now awkward. And I don't know how comfortable I am that we've shared so much with somebody who is shutting down my livelihood as we speak. I think it is super interesting. And if we're looking and we can say one person would have handled this beautifully and one person handled this terribly, that's a lot of information that we should be looking at.
It is. It is. Oh, Joe.
Oh,
It's all the things that
Joe.
we've said, and it's the lack of insight he has about how much work he has to do. Kathleen, who's way ahead of him in terms of emotional maturity and responsiveness, quickly identifies when she has misstepped and she needs to do some work to be kinder, to hold back. And she even says something like, no matter how mean someone is, I should never say something like that. Yes. Oh my gosh, if I could make everyone understand that there's no justification for bad behavior, even if someone is rude or yells, doesn't mean that you should be rude and yell. Like you should always maintain a certain level of respect and communication. He is so far ahead of Joe and all of this knowledge. And the most we see is that he says he has remorse after he zings someone. That doesn't stop him from doing it
Yeah.
repeatedly throughout the rest of the
Yes.
movie. We don't see him reflect on it and acknowledge it in real life to her, how he has to change. We just see him say, you'll feel remorse. I feel remorse. But that's it. It's not what you can do with that.
I think we should go into the deep dive. So, guys, the deep dive this week is about emotional infidelity, which this is one of the first times we truly see this in a movie because there's a whole new technology involved. There's a whole new medium involved, and you can get to know somebody anonymously in a way you couldn't even 5 years earlier. This was a movie that was redone multiple times, and they were anonymous pen pals. But this obviously brings up a whole new slew of questions, and I'm going to really throw this over to Isabelle because she knows a ton about I don't know if you know a ton about emotional infidelity,
So,
but I think you do a lot more because I don't talk about that as much because I'm talking about the beginning of relationships, and we don't see that necessarily as
mhm.
much in beginning relationships. It's something that happens a little bit later. But I will say before we dive in, the very first note I took was, what's a bad sign in your relationship when you are like waiting for your partner to leave and then looking out the windows to make sure they're gone before you do the next thing you're going to do. And that just tells me a lot about where the stability and healthiness of that relationship is. But let's talk about emotional infidelity, a little bit about what it is, how to spot it in ourselves, and just a little bit more.
Yeah. Emotional infidelity can feel really hard to pin down for people because it is a little bit more amorphous than the obvious boundaries of sexual infidelity, which we see this movie highlight, right? Is it cheating if you haven't had sex and if you don't know who that person is? And for a long period of time, people did not know the answer to that. I'll also point out that emotional infidelity might change from person to person, or I should say from relationship to relationship. Some people will be okay with their partner talking to strangers online if that's a part of their agreement or they feel fine with it, fine. Some people will not. So, a lot of the work of identifying emotional infidelity is identifying it in the context of your relationship and where your personal boundaries are. All that being said, emotional infidelity is when you are investing more of your deep emotions, fears, needs, dreams in another person besides your partner. This is why it's so hard to pin down, is because we do that sometimes. I tell my best friend things that I don't tell my husband. And it's not because it's emotionally cheating or that I wouldn't tell him. She just makes sense for that specific dream or to meet that specific need, right? Your partner should be the primary person that you do that with. They don't have to be the only one. They don't always have to be the first one, but they should be the primary one. And as soon as you're taking all of those emotional needs and sharing all your feelings with someone else, you might be getting into territory of being emotionally closer and what we call cheating on your partner with that other person. Another clear sign, which we see in this, is if you're hiding your relationship with that other person from your partner. If you are close with someone, but it's an appropriate relationship, there should be no reason for you to hide the fact that you talk to this person, that you share with them. They shouldn't be a secret part of your life. And if they are, that's probably a good indicator that you're crossing some emotional lines. And you've got to figure out if you want to integrate that person into your life or if you need to end your relationship because actually you're more attached to somebody else. So that's a big overview. And I think the first note I made was the exact same one you did. She waits for her partner to leave, she makes sure he's gone, and then she opens up her computer to correspond with somebody else. And as the movie unfolds, we see that they are sharing way more with each other than they are in their relationships. They're much more connected to this stranger online than they are to their current partners. And that happens, especially when you've got partners like they do who aren't attuned to them, who aren't listening, who rush to problem solving, who are so self focused, they have no space to hear them. So it makes sense. And we don't have to shame them for this happening. These things happen. But I think it is a really good example of, yeah, emotional infidelity, gray area, really falling into the emotional infidelity category. Was that your take too?
Absolutely. And I will tell you, I was single for a really long time, right? So I was single. I did not meet Danny till I was 41. So that means I was dating probably 20 plus years before he and I settled into a relationship. And how I feel about this now as a married woman is not necessarily how I felt about it as a single woman. And that has been a wake up call for me. And it's also made me really look at any friendships I have, who I'm sharing my stories with. Now, Danny and I have a very close relationship. He is my partner through and through. He is my biggest supporter. He celebrates me. We talk through everything. Literally, we're that couple. We talk through everything. He is very much my person. I have other people in my life. I have good friends who also own businesses, and we discuss that portion of my life. There's things, if I've got a tough client or a friendship, I might go to a friend or a coach friend or a therapist friend, but he is my person. And I now know there are people, particularly men, who I had an emotional friendship with that I would not be okay with now. Being in the relationship I am with Danny, I would never have that same kind of friendship. And I would not be comfortable with him having that friendship either. Am I making sense when I say that? I can now see friendships that I had with people who are in relationships that I would not be comfortable with now. I would not be comfortable being
Mhm.
in that relationship. I would not be comfortable with Danny having a friendship like that. So I think that you made such a great point, and that I can't say enough, which is every relationship is different. And the two people who get to decide what feels good for them are the two people in the relationship and no one else. They get
Mhm.
to decide what their friendships look like. They get to decide what their relationship looks like. And those are the two people that should decide. It's great to have people like you and I who can lead them to resources or better conversations or better questions about it. However, I think it's so important for us to be very aware of where we put our time and energy and who we share our stories with. Because I think it's very easy to create a connection with somebody unintentionally almost. When we're bored, when we're distracted, when we're a little bit in the ebb and flow of a normal relationship, which has its own
Right?
boring, and that's not even with kids. Like, I think with kids, that just makes it even harder. Everybody's tired. Everybody's doing 1,000 other things. I can only imagine. But I just think it's a really important things for us to notice that when somebody else starts hearing our stories, hearing our secrets, starts hearing our innermost thoughts more than the person that we've chosen to have a relationship with, that is a choice. And we have to be aware of that choice that we're making.
Yes, it's a choice, and it is, I would argue, oftentimes a symptom that there isn't enough space in your relationship, that you are not feeling connected, you're not feeling heard, you don't feel like your partner cares about those feelings and dreams and stories, right? You're not making it a priority. It is a symptom that means you should look to your current relationship and see if something is missing and work on it there. Or if you don't want to work on it there, then maybe that's indication the relationship has run its course. And the problem with emotional infidelity is that it will never not be exciting to create a new attachment. It comes with its own set of neurochemicals
Yeah,
and
it
hormones.
does.
The question isn't why do people cheat? It's why do they not cheat? Because it's exciting, it's illicit, it's enticing. You feel wanted. And if you've been in a relationship for 20 years, maybe that feeling of being wanted emotionally, sexually has fizzled a little bit. So you go find someone where there's an emotional connection, you finally feel heard, and that is a very quick, slippery slope to sexual attraction and to cheating territory that people pretty undeniably feel like is not okay. So that's a big piece of it too. It's not just having a good friend that you confide in. It's really this there's a special attachment happening with that person that is making them more of your focus for your attachment needs more than your partner. And I do want to normalize that this is normal. Relationships do get a little bit stale. There's periods of time when you don't feel connected. It is a choice whether you work on your current relationship or if you outsource those needs to another person. It happens to a lot of people and it can be addressed. right? And how you choose to address it is also the choice. So if anybody is in that situation, it's okay. It happens. It makes sense. Now is your time to choose if you're going to keep investing in this new person and start to walk down that path, or if you're going to refocus on your current relationship and make that the priority. And there's no right or wrong choice, but it is a choice that you should make with intention.
And I want to take this one slight step further to talk about, but I have definite ideas about love and what love is. And one of the things that drives me nuts in all of our culture when we talk about, and I think it even happens in this movie, but we see it happen a lot in a lot of movies, which is where the person will say to their partner, "Do you love them? Are you in love with this other person?" And
Mm,
that's, to me, not the right question. The question instead is, because we can have emotions with lots of people. And in fact, we can have love and connection with lots of people. But at the end of the day, to me, the question is, are you choosing to build something with this person
mm,
instead of me? Because that's actually what's happening here.
yes.
The same shit that is happening in your relationship is probably going to happen in your next relationship too. You will get bored. There will be time where sex is more exciting than others. There will be time where you feel more disconnected than others. But I hate that we make emotions so everything, so all encompassing, so over the top that we say to people, but are you in love with her, or are you in love with them or him or whoever, instead of, is this what you're choosing? Are you choosing to walk away from us or our family or whatever that is? And are you choosing this person to build a life with? Because that's actually what's happening. Because those feelings that you're feeling right now, just as Isabelle said, that beautiful little cocktail in our brains that is like a high that literally triggers like cocaine in our brains. I love that feeling, like that whole like I love love. A lot of people even still think that's what love is, and it's not. That's attraction, that's infatuation, that's what's even called obsessive love. But we get really caught up on those feelings, and we don't really get caught up on the other statement that I want to hear is this what you're choosing? Because if you're choosing this other person and to build something with that other person, that's a very different conversation than are you in love with them?
Yes. And because we do not have control over our feelings, the chemical in your body, right, that happens with early attachment in people, maybe you are in love with them and you don't have control over that. And you can be in love with someone new and also love your current partner and choose to be with them. And you're right, the framing of are you in love with them? As if that is the ultimate betrayal and that decides the outcome is the wrong question.
And you can feel love and connection with lots of people. At the end of the day, we choose a partner, we choose a family, we choose to say, this is a person that I'm going to build something with. And I hate when the only conversation is, do you have a bunch of feelings for another person? That freaking means anything or will last. I think instead, I want people to have that conversation. Is this what you're choosing? Because if this is what you're choosing, so be it. But also know that you're going to be choosing the same type of problems that are probably coming up in your relationship. A new partner doesn't equal perfection or a whole different type of relationship. It just offers new for a little while. I've seen a lot of friends get divorced, go through relationships, and I've seen people cheat and regret it and say, I should have chose my partner. I should have stayed with my wife, or I should have stayed with my husband. I made a choice on loneliness or disconnection or abrupt feelings versus does this ultimately make the long-term sense? And I just think that also has to be part of the conversation. It
Yeah.
can't only be about love and in love because that love will not last if that relationship sucks.
Yeah. And people have a hard time with this. The truth is, you can actually be in a really good relationship, even marriage, and be attracted to somebody else and want to be with that person and be faced with a decision to make. And people assume that if that happens, it therefore absolutely means your current relationship wasn't good enough. That you have to leave it, right? That it didn't meet all of your needs because you're attracted to somebody else or somebody else is exciting and appealing and enticing. That's part of being a human. we're attracted to other people. That doesn't go away when you fall into a relationship or a marriage. So normalizing, and this is back to the idea of choice. And I'll share a personal story, which is my dad growing up. Whenever my parents get into a silly fight, like not an actual fight, he would look at us and he would say, "Divorce City. That's it. Divorce City. That's for me and your mom." Well, not today. Not today. We'll see though about tomorrow, maybe tomorrow. And it was funny and we knew they wouldn't get divorced. Otherwise it wouldn't have been funny. But it highlighted for me that it was an everyday choice in this funny, silly, lighthearted way, but you choose every day to stay with that person if it's a good day, if it's a bad day, and that's it. At the end of the day, that is the decision you're making. I feel like we've gone really deep now. This is wonderful.
But that's exactly where I want this podcast to go, because this is the conversations we do need to be having.
Yeah.
We're having conversations on, am I in love with that person? And the conversation should be, am I choosing that person? And are they actually a potential partner? Or do I just have a bunch of
Mhm,
feelings from unhealed shit or attachment style or trauma bonding or all of the things that can make us attracted to somebody new?
mhm.
And it could be healthy stuff, but a lot of the times it's not healthy stuff. And I also just think that we allow feelings to make excuses or justifications of things that we would do that are not okay. And I am the first to say there are people that I'm connected to in a former version of my life. I don't mean like a past life, but in my 20s or 30s, that I'm not going to go sit in a room with them because that's confusing to
Yes,
me. There's
absolutely.
a younger version that cared deeply about that person. And out of respect, not only to Danny, but to the beautiful fucking relationship we have built, I am not going to put myself in situations with exes or with people who would make things confusing,
Yeah,
honestly, in my head, where feelings might come up again. I don't do that. I make different choices than I think a younger version of me would have made.
yeah,
And I think that we just have to have talks about that, because I think that sometimes we're like, well, I don't know. I guess that my feelings just took over. That's just not good enough for me. We put ourselves in situations, we make choices, and there are, we can call them consequences or results of those choices, but we have to look at, are we tending to our relationships? Are we making sure they stay good?
mhm,
Danny and I do awkward things such as like check in with each other or have an afternoon where we just talk about our future. And it's not always fun, but it keeps us in check. And that's really important to us,
mhm.
for both of us to feel good.
Yeah. And the risk changes as a relationship grows. You were talking about younger you dating, right? Doing things that you wouldn't do now in your relationship with Danny. And early on, when you are dating or in a new relationship, some people like to hedge their bets a little bit. We're not super together. We're not engaged. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. So I think I'll keep my options open by talking to these other people. I feel like a lot of people have experienced this of, I'm going to keep these doors open too, and we'll see what pans out. That's risky. There's a lot of temptation there that could pull you out of your current relationship, right? If it doesn't feel secure and stable and committed yet. And then as time goes on, it could be the staleness or the monotony or the disconnection or the lack of prioritizing each other that makes you look outward for that. And so you really have to have this sort of constant awareness about where you're investing your time and attention, and knowing that the reasons for looking outward may change over time, and the choice that you make in response to that is still yours to make. So you have agency in what you decide, which is empowering. It's an exciting idea that you could be with somebody despite feelings for somebody else because you have the power to choose. It's a great thing.
It's an amazing thing. I want people to feel empowered after these episodes, because I think that when we look at love and relationships, a lot of the terms even we use, we fall into it, right? It's all consuming. We really talk about love as this magical idea that we have no control over. And we have so much control over who we spend our time with, who gets our attention, who gets our energy, and who gets our choice of
Mhm.
picking a partner. And I think that a lot of us live in this space, and especially the singles that I work with, live in this space of we're waiting for someone to choose us. And I want us to listen to this and go, we get to choose. We get to ask better questions and have tough conversations and choose a person I'm always asking people, not how do you feel, but is this a person a partner? How do you feel with them? Do you guys celebrate each other and make each other feel good and hear each other and ask good questions? Or are you just going through the motions hoping somebody will choose you? Those are two very different ways to date. And I'm a big believer that if you're over 30 and you're wanting to date and you're not actively dating, you're probably going to have to work on it. Like this ideal of just college where we're surrounded by a million single people and just we hope that's going to show up. Everybody's like, where are the singles? I'm like, there's no island. Like you're just going to have to leave your house and start talking to people and putting yourself in new situations. Nobody likes that answer. But those are the answers that create relationships that are good instead of just hoping somebody chooses you and you waking up 5 years later going, oh, I'm in a relationship and I don't even like this person. And it happens a
Which
lot.
happens. It does happen. Okay, so say, what if Meg Ryan and Greg Kinnear and Tom Hanks and Parker Posey actually were the right fit for each other, and we see them do the work and tune into each other and connect? Because in some ways, I feel like that's my question, is would those couples have made it if they had turned toward each other and
100%.
invested that energy in each other? Because they made sense in a lot of ways. They just stopped emotionally investing in their relationship.
And 100%.
That's the real love story.
I actually think that by far, Greg Kinnear, is a much better match for her, but he is, I'm going to use the word distracted. That's the nicest way I'm going to say it, right? He's in his own little
That's
la la
fair.
land and obviously loves when Parker Posey's, I loved your article. He's, tell me more. He is loving that attention, which shows some insecurities there and things like that. But I do think that they were probably much better matches. Parker Posey called him out multiple times. I forget the line that she said, and she's like, well, yes. And that's her situation because of you. Like I was like, way to go. Like she called him out. Like I actually think that if they both would have turned towards their partners, they would have been, because she was a strong person that I think really could have stood up to him and helped him become a better person. Although she once again was also distracted. But I agree. I think that actually value wise, their
values,
original partners are probably better suited for them. And
I think so.
Which is not what I think they want us to take away, which can lead us very quickly to would they last?
Let's talk about would they last. I have strong thoughts, but I want to hear yours first.
Oh, you know what I'm going to say. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no, and here is why. I'm going to say no because not living in the world of Nora Ephron and these characters created as is, I'm going to say, as somebody who talks about healthy dating and relationships all day, every day, in no way should this relationship move forward. He was manipulative. He lied to her. He somewhat even gaslit her. And he had options throughout this whole entire thing to change that power dynamic, to let her in on the conversation, to let her in on almost like a joke. I do not think in any way that this woman should be with a guy who literally shit on her life and her livelihood. And is she going to now just be the dependent? Is she just going to move in with him in his little capitalistic world? I don't see that. I don't see her being happy or comfortable long-term with that. I think that the anonymity allowed them to be vulnerable that I don't think he is willing to be in real life.
Yeah, I completely agree. I said, no, I don't think they could last. The deceit piece, if nothing else, then he was keeping her in the dark and important information. I don't know how she could get past that. Even if she somehow could, I don't see how their lives integrate, because marrying a person also means marrying their life outside of you. And I don't know how she's going to watch him go to work every day at Fox Books and not feel hurt and resentment. Unless if we rewrite the ending, and here's the way in which I could see it working with my alternate ending, he tells her that he knows it's her earlier on, and he steps up and challenges his family's little empire and subsidizes her store just around the corner, or finds a way to support local businesses and to stop being this capitalistic bad guy, and shows that character growth. And we see a values shift for him that would align with her values. We would see him grow in a really critical way that would make it possible for them to be together. That's the ending I see where they could actually make it. Even then, the family piece would still be hard. It's hard to imagine her going to his family's house for Christmas with Jillian. Well, I guess she wouldn't be there because she's now off with
Well, but
Nanny
she
Maureen.
would, but they still have Matthew, right? Or
That's
Maddie.
right.
I'm humored by the 90s, early 2000s that don't seem to be concerned about children, animals, or anybody else involved besides just the two main characters, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
hilarious to me. You will be happy to know that there is an alternative ending, like fan fiction through the internet, that was similar to what you said, which is this idea that he would either put her in charge of the kids area or like give her livelihood back or whatever it is. And when asked, both Delia, who is Nora's sister who helped write this, were like, no, that was not the ending. They're like, so people were trying to give like maybe a little happier shift, and they're like, no, that's not it. It ends in the park, it's done. One of the things I love about now what we're seeing in TV and movies that I love is that we do see not necessarily value shift, but growth and
Mhm.
evolution of characters and becoming better people. I think we see that in Ted Lasso. I think we see that in Schitt's Creek. I think we see that in Parks and Rec. There's just some TV shows that I really love that I see, and we don't see that growth there.
Yeah.
I think that there was a space and place that in my world, I would have loved to see him grow as a person and felt more deserving of her and her character at the end, and that's not what I took away from it.
Mhm.
It was a little bit like, "Can't you just forgive me and then move into my world," where I don't see her comfortable sitting around the holiday dinner with his dad and his grandfather talking about their customers or talking about women. I don't actually think she's ever gonna be comfortable in that scenario, and you mentioned it, but we don't sometimes in real life when we're dating, think about when we integrate lives, how that's going to look. Family dynamics, friend dynamics, work schedules, all of these different things that can, honestly, when it comes down to it, make or break relationships. And we don't think about that because we're so stuck on the in love, the feelings, the everything else. I literally like to think enough of Kathleen that she would never have been okay long term in that situation. That she would have been on a boat because she doesn't like boat people, been on a boat and going, "Mm-mm,
No.
this is not where I want to be." I would
No.
rather her date Steve Zahn, who I also love. We did not mention. I love him so much, period, and all of the roles that he plays. I would rather her date Steve Zahn in the shop than I
Agreed.
would her putting herself in that situation. If she were my friend or my client, I would be like, do not put yourself in a situation like this. These people are not good people.
Especially because he took her life from her. She has no family left. Now George works for Fox Books, right? Like he took everything from her. So she has no life for him to integrate into either. So it really would be a full her entering his life with his schedule dictating everything and his family dictating all the holidays. And I don't see that being good for her. So I hope she wouldn't.
And I'd love to know what would happen in 5 years when Amazon came knocking and the Fox Books wasn't doing that well. Who's he going to be in that situation? Who's going to be when their family is not making millions upon
Tons of
millions?
money. Yeah.
Because
Okay.
we've seen that. So a couple of fun, I love to bring trivia. I love to find like fun facts online and bring them to you. So once again, I think that a lot of people, and if you don't know, this has been based on many iterations before this. It was first, I believe, a Hungarian play called Parfumeur, which was about two coworkers that hate each other but are secret pen pals and fall in love. So that's the main concept, which I wish they would have done because the power dynamic in this ruined it so much for me of him being Fox Books and everything else, and then became Shop Around the Corner, which was a 1940s movie with Jimmy Stewart. And that's part of the reason Tom Hanks didn't almost take it because he had been compared to Jimmy Stewart so many times. Something that I feel like is not even a 2024 thing that people never talk about Jimmy Stewart. We did in the 80s and 90s. It also then became In the Good Old Summertime, which was a musical with Judy Garland in 48. So we saw like major iterations of this throughout the years. They'll do that. There's honestly not a ton of new stories out there. There's so much stuff based on even the tide of Pride and Prejudice to this one, how much it's brought up, and Mr. Darcy. So that's interesting. The shop around the corner was actually a cheese and antique store that they closed down for 3 weeks, completely made into a bookstore, and then put it back exactly the way she left it. But I just thought that was really cool because they totally took over a real store in New York. And cheese and antiques, as somebody from Wisconsin who loves cheese very much, I don't know how antiques and cheese are together, but hey. So what are your ratings? What are your tacos?
I really struggled with this because it has such a nostalgic place in my heart. So my personal rating for personal reasons is a 4.5. I loved it when I was younger. I can't not love it for that reason. Healthy lessons rating, I gave it a 2 because of their other relationships and the lessons that we see there, and mainly because of how Kathleen is and her relationships, people in her life. None of that is due to Joe. I almost gave it a 1 because Joe did so many things that were wrong, but 2 felt right. What about you?
I actually gave it the exact same thing. Like I ended up finding it delightful. Like I said, I actually went back because I was like, oh, if I remember correctly, they're cheating on their part. You know what I mean? Oh, am I going to this now in 2024? And just because I found the script so smart, so delightful, I actually gave it 4 because at the end I was still smiling. I'm like, I shouldn't believe in this. I shouldn't be okay with it. I still weirdly am because Tom Hanks. But the love lessons I gave 2. As you mentioned, I think that's a push, right? Because
Yeah.
his character is so toxic, if we want to use that word, but just so manipulative. I'm sad that as a culture, we thought that this was a beautiful love story for the
Romantic.
past 20 some years.
I know.
I'm a little sad that I did. I'm a little
It
sad
didn't
that
hold up.
it did not. And his character is terrible. I did not remember his character being that bad. His character is casually cruel and mean. And I'm disappointed that this is what young Isabelle and young Kira were taught that love looks like. And we wonder why our relationships are the way, not yours and mine necessarily, but just as a culture, we wonder why relationships are struggling so much. But when we are using last week and this week, when we start looking at these inspirations for love and relationships, particularly women are being taught very sad and terrible things. You know, that somebody can treat you like that and ruin your life and it still be love.
And that it could still be love. And implicit in that is that he's wealthy. He's bringing that to the table, and that will somehow make up for the way that he's treated her. And because he's goofy and he's likable and he smiles, right? And it's this idea of like falling in love with them, being caught in love with someone because they're just so endearing, regardless of how they're treating you. And this is the reverse of our previous conversation about how to lose a guy in 10 days, right? That someone can treat you as terribly as possible with or without a reason. But if they're just lovely and cute and endearing enough, you'll just forgive them without an apology and you'll have a happy ending. And that should not happen in real life.
Blech. That's what I have to say to that. So
I bummed myself out about that. I know.
I'm excited about this podcast. I hope everybody that's listening also is, because the thing that we've been saying since day one of talking is we love rom-coms. I still enjoyed this freaking movie. I still thought Meg Ryan was the literally most adorable person on earth in 1998, her outfits and her haircut. But I want to have the bigger conversations because I think love and healthy relationships are so much more important and better than these silly rom-coms even give credit to. And I want people to get into real
Mhm.
love. Love rom-coms, but love real love more. Love healthy love more. Love that's going to make you feel good on a daily basis. We can look at this and say, I don't know, there's going to be a point where Kathleen in the next couple of days, these thoughts start creeping in and she's going to be like, wait a second. This doesn't feel good.
What
Is
happened?
this really love? Is this
Mhm.
somebody who loves me? Do they do those things or do they not tell me things or do they let me sit in a cafe by myself? waiting for someone. Listen, everybody has been somewhere waiting for somebody who either doesn't show up or is late enough to know what that feeling feels like. And it sucks. It sucks. This to me is a little bit of what's not helping in the world. Because I am worried that women
Yes, I agree.
will go out there and somebody will treat them like this and they think it's okay.
Yeah, they'll look for this because if there is a romantic grand gesture at the end of it, it will erase things that shouldn't be erased, or that it is somehow cute or romantic to deceive the person that you want to be in a relationship with. All of these messages are not a solid start for a happy, healthy, long-term relationship. And why rom-coms are confusing for me is because I love them to death. Like you said, I was smiling at the end of this, loved it. And yet, when you dig a little bit deeper, the messaging is really wrong. And so you've got to be careful to not get caught up in this easy romantic story and make sure you are asking yourself the right questions and picking somebody who's treating you in the right way.
100%.
Sorry, Joe. It ain't you.
It ain't Joe.
FOX.
FOX. It is not Joe FOX in this scenario. All right, guys. I think that we have brought plenty of interesting and new thoughts today. Isabelle, what are we watching?
Next week is Crazy Rich Asians. I'm very excited for that one. We're going to have a whole different set of things to talk about.
Excited. I'm very excited. I just watched it last night with Danny. He's hilarious. I'll have to start taking pictures because he started watching rom-coms with me. He's super into it. He loves to make comments that he use on this podcast.
Oh,
He's
really?
ridiculously
Danny?
cute. Oh, yes. Oh, Danny. Yeah, he'll be like, oh, that's not okay. He'll be like, did he just say that? I should probably start secretly taking video. It's pretty funny because he literally listens to me talk about relationships for a long time now. So he knows what he's talking about. But I cannot wait to talk about Crazy Rich Asians because I think we're bringing a whole different set of conversation of just 2018 being set in Singapore, being literally one of the most stunningly shot, beautiful movies. I think this is such a beautifully laid out movie in some ways. It's such a view into a culture that I know nothing about. So it was such a great movie for me. I can't wait to talk about it. All right, everybody, make sure that you are in our Facebook community, Rom-Com Rescue. But if you go to romcomrescue.com, you can get all of that right now. Come talk about this episode. Tell us what you thought. Do you love this movie? Are you now side-eyeing it a little bit since we've had this conversation? We want to hear from you. We are everywhere. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook. Find us wherever you love to hang out. And don't forget to subscribe so you know when we put out every new episode. And you would be the bee's knees, the cat's meow, the cat's pajamas if you would share this with your friends. So we get everybody talking on another level about love, dating, and relationships.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye. And remember, your next great love could be just around the corner.